Welcome to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.
Who were the most intriguing early paranormal researchers? What do you do when the ghost is picking on your dog? Is it possible that you can die and never even realize it?
Hello and welcome to the 958th edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno, coming to you from WOON AM and FM radio in Woonsocket, Rhode Island, on the Paranormal Radio app from TalkStream Live, on YouTube and via TuneIn.com. I'm Ben, and those shape-shifting questions came from my co-host, partner in Paranormal Adventures, and dad, Paul. Today we bring you an open-line show to answer your questions on a number of paranormal subjects. The number is 401-766-1240. And the email is paul@behindtheparanormal.com.
Well, so let's get right to it and see what happens.
Yes,
we
sir.
have questions, of course, from our dear friend and occasional guest co-host, Peter Shelley in Bogota, Colombia.
Okie dokie. And our very pervasive Peter writes to us, Paul, in the 1970s, you were first starting paranormal investigations. What personalities do you recall on the East Coast who were connected to the field aside from Ed and Lorraine Warren?
Well, that's an interesting question, Peter. There weren't a whole lot of people. The one I knew best, beside the Warrens, was Dr. Brian Riley. Not a well-known name even then or now. He was a professor, he was a psychologist, parapsychologist also, excuse me, who taught at the University of Connecticut. And we were all in Connecticut, the Warrens, me, Dr. Riley, and we would get together. As a matter of fact, I remember one, I think it was a charity dinner we attended in Hartford or West Hartford, Connecticut at the time. That this had to be 1975 or so. And Dr. Riley and his wife came with us. It was the Warrens and myself. And another person came and sat down with us. Turned out to be a man named Ivor Hugh. Now, Dr. Riley was from the UK originally, and Ivor Hugh was also. He was not a parapsychologist. He was a TV clown. Okay, but he was also a brilliant professor. He taught drama and stuff at various universities around the area. And I had watched him on the old Channel 18 in Hartford since I was a kid, Flippy the Clown. And I had, when I was little, I had done taken a purple crayon and done this drawing, and I sent it in, and he got it and he showed it on the air. That was like the highlight of my media life at the time. So I'm looking at the guy, and, you know, he's in a nice suit and everything. And I couldn't help but resist talking about the show. And he claimed he remembered that purple drawing. So that's a little bit aside from the question. But Dr. Brian Riley was very interesting. I still have a copy of his original theories, which were parapsychological, of course, and very much along the scientific lines of parapsychology at the time. Data, statistics, various minor experiments and teleportation, or at least RSPK, the spontaneous, recurrent spontaneous psychokinesis, things of that kind. So I remember him. Of course, at the time also, the major figure was Hans Holzer, whom I did not know. He was all over the place, had written more books than anybody else. The Warrens at the time, there were no books about or by them, except for one called Deliver Us from Evil. That was the first book. Then they had a ghostwriter appropriately write it, and I met him, and that was the only. They weren't all that well known at the time, except in Connecticut. And of course, the major figure. And Ben said when we did a podcast with him that he had never seen me starstruck before.
It was really impressive.
Yeah. So that was Jacques Vallée, of course, who's been around forever. I think he might have still been in France at the time, but he started, in the 50s, for heaven's sake. and he was a pioneer of a lot of the ideas that we espouse today. For example, the idea of window areas, as John Keel called them, or the multiverse, things of this kind. I did not know of him at the time, never mind know him. I mean, today I know him. So I think that he was a major figure kind of in the background there, and that was kind of he would come up in my attention later on. But those are really the major people at the time. Also locally in Connecticut was Mary Pasquarella, who ran the Psychic Research Institute in New Haven. And there's an interesting story behind that I've never mentioned on the air. I mentioned it in my program about working with Ed and Lorraine Warren on the lecture circuit. But Mary, it's funny because, when I do that, I show a picture of the Sopranos, And I say, I'm not saying Ed and Lorraine were involved with the mob, but according to Ed, Mary Pasquarella's husband was. So what happened was that I was marooned somewhere, and Mary Pasquarella and her husband picked me up. Were going to bring me back to the Warrens' house, and as I knew Mary pretty well, and I was telling her, you're supposed to be a Catholic. You really shouldn't be doing the medium thing, And her husband got all upset with this. Who's this kid? I was in the seminary at the time, but nevertheless, telling my wife she can do this and that. It's like, my mind's made up. Don't bother me with theology. So, according to Ed, Mr. Pasquarella got so upset that he was going to put a contract out on me with the mob. So, do I believe this or don't I? But that's what Ed said. And Ed said he saved my life by talking him out of having me killed. So, that's an absolutely true story. And I don't know, that's really... That's what happened. And,
can't say it's boring.
No, not at all. And certainly one of the weirdest things that ever happened to me when I was working with Ed and Lorraine. Mm. So anyway, I hope that answers your question, Peter. Those were the major people in my world at the time. But again, Jacques Vallée I didn't discover till the end of the 70s. And I said, aha, this makes a lot more sense than dead people. Mm. So, I don't know. Who were your inspirations, Ben? Other than your father.
This is a tough question because I haven't really. This is gonna sound weird. I haven't thought about it a ton.
Yeah.
I guess it's I always obviously I was really a big fan of yours. Because I grew up with you.
Yeah, you couldn't help it.
No, not at all. I mean, Shane was always a pretty big inspiration to me as well. Yeah. Shane Searway was always a pretty big inspiration because he's a very earnest guy, and I always kind of strive to be as stick to my principles as much as he does.
Yeah.
And I always respect the heck out of him because he really sort of is very like if he believes something, he believes it. If he doesn't, he doesn't. And
I agree.
And
I respect him for that tremendously.
Yeah, and it's like he doesn't compromise on his principles, which I can really...
money doesn't sway him.
Right, and I really appreciate that about Shane. And that always... I always look at him and I'm like, wow, this man's got integrity.
That's the big... with the capital I. Not that there's a lot of money in this field. There isn't.
There's not.
You write books and stuff, you make a few royalties. But and we certainly don't make a living at this. I'm a working journalist on other areas, and Ben is with the commercial construction company as an administrator. Mm. But I'm just a lot of people try to make a living at this, and it just doesn't work. However, if you do get into major TV productions, things of this kind, you can make a lot of money. Mm. But Shane has been offered this and that here and there, and he won't take it because he doesn't feel right with it, or he doesn't feel that it's honest, and it lacks integrity.
Yeah.
And I think that's worthy of tremendous respect today. So
I'd have to think about who. I don't have a ton of people I look up to. but I do have a lot of influences in my thinking.
Yeah.
And I think that's a different animal altogether.
Okay. Well, let's move on to Peter's second question, because the answer to the question is should be calling in any minute now.
Yes, I'll keep an eye on the phone line there, which is, what is the latest from Rick Eno, which he should be coming in just a little bit via telephone.
Yes, calling from California.
Sunny California.
Yeah, Rick is a cousin of ours, and the question, how many Enos can there be? And he is an occasional co-host of the show, particularly with Open Lines.
I always get a kick out of our mailbox here at the station. There's a little label on it that says Uno Dos Enos.
Yeah, that's right. A mailbox being a physical mailbox, not necessarily.
not an email inbox.
Uno Dos Tres Enos.
And speak of the Rick.
Coming in. And, Rick is the Northern California reporter for our show. And he's with MUFON. He's a certified investigator. And he's perfect. So Rick has just called in, and we'll get him on the air to answer Peter's question about what's going on in the world of Rick Eno. Hey, Cuz.
Hi, Cuz. How you doing? Good Sunday to you both.
Oh, you too. So everybody wants to know what's going on in your world and what you're working on.
Okay, well, I guess I'll start at the top because that's the most relevant at the moment. There's three things really going on. The first one's unrelated. It's more about health and cancer. I've been focusing on this, watching this clinical trial about glioblastoma. That's been the first thing that's looking promising. The second thing that's been, which is probably the most pertinent for people at the moment, but I would say on the paranormal side, I don't know what's happening out on the East Coast. You can let me know, but we are getting more and more orbs showing up and being reported on. Now, these aren't physical craft that you can, sort of enough hold. At least that's what the eye has revealed, that it's more of an orb. And my latest case was on July 14th, where a guy was just walking his dog, and all of a sudden he thought he was looking at stars, and then he realized these were moving in independent ways. He took videos of them, but you know how that goes with the iPhone. It's kind of like a blur.
Oh, yeah.
Could capture the behavior. And then they started moving as a group out west. Now, I would say, like, a number of things. I'm still researching the case. I would say, like, it's a possibility of drones, possibility of this. But, initially I've never known drones to show up as major bright lights high in the sky. But the thing about it is, not just me, but other investigators, because I'm not the only one in Northern California, are getting the same thing. They're getting more and more orbs. I would love to know what's going on out east, and if you think there's any significance to what's going on, I'd absolutely love to hear it. And then just secondly, if you want to know what my interest has been going on, I had a great meeting with Deb Rooney, and I learned a lot about the cryptids, particularly dogmen, that I had no idea. And I'm going to start looking into those reports more in California because I haven't been.
Yeah, I've heard a lot from there too. Deb Rooney being the assistant director of the Northern California MUFON. Yeah. Has been a guest on the show. A wonderful person and researcher. Excuse me. Yeah, the orb thing is interesting because it puts me in mind of the last interview we ever did with the great Ted Phillips from Missouri. Matter of fact, as with many guests on the show, this was the last or one of the last interviews he ever did before he translated. So that seems to be a pattern. Now we tell you, right, Rick? You're a guest co-host. They usually survive.
You've survived this long.
Yes. So, but as far as Ted was concerned, he would note that in his probably the world's largest collection of data and evidence for physical landings of UFOs or UAPs, that they had begun to morph over the last 15 or so years from what appeared to be nuts and bolts craft to light balls, he would call them. And in the paranormal in general, they're known as orbs, of course. What they are, as soon as you have them figured out, somehow they begin to do something anomalous that makes your explanation questionable. In the ghost realm, they're considered to be spirits, which is naive in my opinion. Although we have photographs of there appear to be faces very clearly in these orbs. On the other hand, the UFO people think that they're UFOs. In 2019, May of 19, when we got our well-known video of a UFO flying over the triangle area that we were investigating, a bunch of witnesses, including Shane Searway, whom we mentioned before, and Chuck Credo from Seacoast Saucers of New England, and Alexander Petikoff, the great filmmaker, all there saw this. I got it on video, and the object that came out of the cloud-like formation looked very solid. It didn't look like a typical orb to me, and then it went back into the thing, and what it was, I don't know. There was some speculation that orbs are living creatures, even some of the ones that are interpreted as UFOs. So it's really an open question. Ben, what do you think about orbs?
I think it depends on the context. I think it's kind of hard to lump them into either or categories because I feel like they pop up in very different circumstances. So, I mean, you tend to see orbs, i.e. in the Pennsylvania Triangle case, where they pop up, before Bigfoot appears or something like that. In some instances, in a few cases we've had, they'll be floating around in houses, sort of seemingly, benign, just kind of hanging around. Other times they could be associated with UFO phenomena. I always kind of liked the explanation that they might just be balls of plasma, electrified air molecules, which in my opinion, if we're gonna take the viewpoint of, well, it could just be, world boundaries or whatever, then, that would make sense, highly, electromagnetic areas or phenomena that would cause that could electrify a bunch of air molecules and create these things to just sort of, float around, and, that might be an explanation for it, but, because it seems like the common denominator is that they hang around places that tend to have, a lot of phenomena happening. And they seem to have, their only connection is they seem to just sort of exist there.
Well, one question I would ask Rick is as you see these cases coming in, Rick, are these orbs that are seen with the naked eye, or are they
that's a good question.
Taken with photographic media?
Well, they're orbs seen with the naked eye.
Okay,
and then
that makes a difference.
Captured on a cell phone.
Yeah.
Which doesn't do it justice. I mean, it doesn't even look. I've seen things in the sky, and I'm not big on photographing with a digital, piece of equipment because it never does justice what your naked eye is seeing. I always thought it's better to just draw it to explain it because the video doesn't come out. It's a big blur.
Yeah, there were a lot of incidents in my very early days when, like Fred Flintstone would come with me on cases. There would be photographs taken with film and 35 millimeter cameras or Kodak Instamatic cameras, but non-digital media. And we didn't get orbs like that. We'd get kind of like things that look like flashes of light or stars. But digital media today would capture the same thing and interpret it as something, and there you get your orbs. But I have seen orbs with the naked eye. Many people have. So it is still pretty much an open question. But Rick,
Paul?
Yeah.
I was going to say one more thing. The question I leave in everyone's mind is, are these incidents happening more because people are more aware, or is there something about our new environment, the new technology, 5G, nuclear bombs, I don't know, whatever, go down the list, that's making them more aware of us in coming here?
Might
Maybe
be all of the
nothing to do
above.
with our- Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. It's almost like you anticipated the thought that just occurred to me. And it is an interesting question, because as I was pondering the orb, I was pondering specifically how we as humans, whenever we tend to mess with things, the environment sort of reacts to it. It's like, and that's in every aspect of life, right? You go out into your yard, you spray a bunch of weed killer, and the environment reacts to that. It's like, sure, your grass looks greener, but a bunch of other stuff dies in the process. I guess on a macro scale, as we tend to mess with, a lot of things. Just think of all of the wonderful gadgets and things, and how they affect, not even just the superficial environment, but the fabric of reality, right?
Yeah.
And obviously there would be some sort of response to it. Now, okay, well, how does this relate to the paranormal? Let's say, we have a parasite case, right? People try to, affect their environment by, let's say, using a Ouija board, right? It's like, okay, well, I'm going to try and control this or affect it in a way, and just really get in there and try to mess with the environment. And so you do that, and you make things worse. And so the environment responds, in kind, which is, it leads to things getting worse and worse. So, imagine that on a massive scale, right? We're trying very heavily to affect the world around us, and, the environment is responding. Whether it's multiple worlds we're trying to mess with, sort of intentionally or not, it's responding in kind. I would argue that because we're trying so very hard to control every aspect of our world, ourselves, in all of these abstract things, we're trying so hard to control all of it and grasp it and manipulate it, that it's just making things worse. It's like, you step back in time, people are, you look at mythology, right? We tried very hard to basically control everything. And, you see things like monsters and cryptids and all these things, just sort of wandering around, and you wonder, well, what happened? Why don't they exist? And it's like, well, there was a point in time where we kind of just stopped trying to control things and sort of allowed stuff to happen. But then we just sort of forgot all of that and said, well, let's just keep trying again. And so, so you have all of these phenomena coming back in a strong way. None of this is new. And I've been trying to point this out for years now. Canine cryptids, right? None of that's new. All of this, poltergeist, none of that's new. Like, aliens appearing from places and doing things, none of that's new. This is all stuff that's been happening, and as time has gone on, we as humans, we like to say history repeats itself, but we only think of that in a political sense. We think of it in a political sense, thanks to our fine friend Karl Marx, where all history is the story of class conflict. But it's not just about political stuff. It's every aspect. It's every aspect of the human story repeats itself constantly.
Yeah.
Well, Ben's comments lead into another thought that brings us perhaps to another layer, is the Heisenberg uncertainty principle in quantum physics. That we, taken to its extreme, it can be interpreted as that we literally will create realities within the physical world, whatever the physical world means. So, what influence are we having on the arrival or creation of orbs, when all the feral ghost hunters sit in the house with all their instruments they don't understand and say, raise the temperature or lower the temperature, and it happens. Maybe they're doing it. So these are all questions. But anyway, we're coming up on a... Yeah, go ahead, Rick.
I was just going to quickly, I always think about this. Chaos it has to be created. And it seems in our world today, between what you just said, what Ben said, and, the advances in technology, we're definitely increasing the entropy in our environment, and that's more excitement, more possibilities. And I do think, personally, I'm leaning towards, with the chaos, you get noticed. And when you get noticed, things want to see what's going on over there. And I feel that that's kind of what's going on now. As we get more chaotic and everything we have, we're being noticed. And the dimensional world, the other world, the universe, you name it, and they're coming.
Yeah, that's a thought right there. Well, there it is. Rick, I know how busy you are, so we'll let you go, and thank you very much, and we'll have you back on the show real soon. People love you, kid.
Okay. All right, love you both. Have a great Sunday, guys.
Catch you next time.
All right, so let's take our mid-show break. You're listening to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON 1240 AM and 99.5 FM in New England's beautiful Blackstone River Valley. We'll be right back with Open Lines.
This is John Martin with an AARP Rhode Island update. In a thriving community, people of all ages and abilities have a variety of safe and accessible options for getting around. Walking, biking, pushing a stroller, or maneuvering a wheelchair, taking public transportation, or driving your own car. Planning, designing, and building roads that meet the needs of all users is essential to building a truly livable community. Complete Streets Design allows everyone to share the road and get their own safe piece of the street. Join AARP Rhode Island on Tuesday, August 9th at 10 a.m. for a free virtual forum featuring national and local experts showcasing the successful implementation of Complete Streets projects around the country and in Rhode Island, and how communities benefit. Learn how cities and towns consider and incorporate these design principles and how you can get involved in your community. That's Tuesday, August 9th at 10 a.m. Register today. Join us. Register at aarp.org/RI events.
You can depend on us for public service. ON Radio.
And welcome back to Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno on WOON Radio. And we are continuing with open lines today. Our phone number 401-766-1240. Or you can email Paul at behindtheparanormal.com. And we have a new case ourselves in Coventry, Rhode Island. And if, Ben, you would read the comments from Betty.
Mm-hmm.
Betty is a personal friend of mine. We go back a ways. She's well known in the Rhode Island community. So what does Betty have to report to us?
So Betty writes to us, "My brother and his wife moved into a house in Coventry, and pretty soon thereafter, one of their dogs was shoved off a couch by an unseen entity of some sort. And then my brother smelled old lady perfume. Oh, frightening. Their dogs act weird when when in one of their rooms, and also one of them just sat at the bottom of the stairs, staring/acting as though looking at someone. They were sitting outside in the driveway area, and their son saw a chair move. They are wondering if something should/could be done, or if I knew anyone who could come by to check it out and ask the ghost to leave, or what. Any guidance you can provide would be most helpful. I'm going there this Sunday, and am scared." Well, Betty, I'm sure there's nothing to be scared about.
Yeah, it's that's something we would really have to go and check the environment there. But I would say initially that there are a number of assumptions that we really suggest people not make. The presence of a ghost, whatever you mean by a ghost, is questionable for this reason. I have been in many situations where things have moved, where pets have responded. And in my opinion, there was no presence as such when that occurred. I think that there are energies and forces that will accompany manifestations of multiversal phenomena. In other words, if you're in a place, and these things can move, traditionally sometimes they're called ley lines. I think that's good in some ways, questionable in others. But when we have the boundaries of parallel worlds, the multiverse theories of quantum physics, which I find explain the paranormal far, far better than dead people. You can have energies that occur. The metaphor I always use is if you're running to answer the doorbell, you stir up some wind, and maybe there are some papers on the table, you run by it, the papers blow in the wind, fall off the table. You didn't do that deliberately, but the conditions you created or that accompanied your passage actually moved the wind and moved the papers. In some of the worst poltergeist cases I've ever done, notably Bridgeport, 1974, the famous one, I really felt that on most occasions, not all, that the quote-unquote ghost or demon or poltergeist was not actually doing the moving of the furniture. Not always. Sometimes there was a presence when that happened. But, a table would flip over. The girl would rise off the floor, the young girl, Marcy. And I just didn't feel any presence there. When the TV came over and hit me in the leg, I didn't feel any presence. Other times, I was confronted with terrifying presences, terrifying in their strength, and in the very presence of their being there. It was amazing. The electrical tingle would wash all over your body. So I don't think we can assume that there is an entity doing this. It sounds as though an entity might be present somehow, somewhere or somewhen, at what we call today an intersect point, where two worlds are coming in. Now, what's interesting is the aroma of the perfume, and you'll have to tell me later what you mean by old lady perfume. We don't want to insult any demographic group, but the presence of we often hear cigar smoke or this sort of thing. Sometimes the conditions have been very humid. If you have a carpet that was there when someone else lived there, it's possible that would retain a cigarette smell or even a perfume smell, especially if somebody spilled the perfume. But it also could mean you're at an intersect point or an overwash. These are all vocabulary words we had to invent to even talk about this stuff, where you have the world. And remember, in the multiverse approach that we take and a lot of physicists take, all time is simultaneous. There is no past, there is no future. We just experience it that way because we're not up to experiencing it all at once. So you may have an old woman wearing that perfume, occupying the same space as you are, but in a different parallel reality where it's what to us would be the past or what to us would be the future. She might not live there yet in our world. These are all things that you have to consider. So what we would do is come in and check the place out. When you've done this as long as I have, and Ben too, you know what to look for as far as what the feelings are, and we can pick up if there's something there or not, and in that way take it from there. If something is hostile, or heaven forbid it's a parasite, a negative entity, that we should be able to tell and go from there. But at this point, we always tell people, forget everything you thought you knew about this field, because as our 2016 book said, Behind the Paranormal, everything you know is wrong. And we include ourselves in that. We're writing on the clean slate as we take up every case. So that's a minority opinion in the paranormal world, which is why we're seldom asked to speak at paranormal conventions. We're bad for business. We question all their theories. But this has worked for me since the late 1970s. Every time, in the sense, it hasn't always worked out well, but as far as the interpretation, we've always found it to be true. So, Ben, what comments would you have for Betty?
Well, I think one of the there's two, in my opinion, two very important aspects for understanding the situation. There's understanding the narrative that we tell, and there's also understanding the practical stuff. So, we all love a good ghost story. We love a good spooky story. That's what we know. That's what we understand, because how we understand reality is based on stories and narratives. And so we take the data points we have, and to understand them, we construct a story out of it. Okay, so with the data points we have, we know that I'm going to say no in quotations. We think that there's an old lady here, she died here, she's mad, she's pushing dogs, she's doesn't like dogs, the dogs don't like her, and, you know, something happened with her and dogs, maybe she died there and a dog attacked her. But that's the narrative that's starting to form out of the data points we have, which is not much, but look at the story we got out of that.
Yeah.
So understanding that, you know, okay, well, before we construct a narrative about what's going on, let's understand the practical stuff, you know. Let's take a step back before we start building a story out of this of a sad old lady that didn't like dogs. We're going to take a step back and say, okay, well, you know, we have our questionnaire we ask with every case. You know, we sort of whittle down the explanations with it, and then we take that and say, all right, well, let's construct something that we've experienced prior, and see how that fits into the situation. And 9 times out of 10 it does, but then again, it's our experience, and it's what's worked for us mostly. So I think one thing to really understand is before we start telling a narrative, and before we start telling a story about it, we need to understand the parts of the story first, and we need to deconstruct it and say, okay, well, let's take individual piece and understand it. So, you know, something pushed a dog. Okay, you know, we'll come back to that later. But, you know, smelling perfume, we've already kind of discussed that. You know, a chair moving, we've kind of already discussed that. But, you know, some of the other things we would deconstruct is the environment. Okay, you know, is there a problem with the electric bill? Is it unusually high? Even for the summer, you know, running air conditioners and stuff is not cheap. Is it possible that, you know, you might have electrical leaks in the house? Is there possible, like, you know, electrical magnetic activity that could be, you know, angering your dogs? You know, I have a cat who acts like a dog, who every night for at least, well, actually he stopped doing it recently, but for like a good few months he would go into our bathroom in the night and he would sit and stare at the ceiling, which was always disconcerting. You get up in the middle of the night, you turn on the light, and there he is. He turns and he looks, and he's like, you know, squinting at you because he's just been standing there. And so we were like, oh, yeah, what's going on? You know, and you know, my first thought wasn't, oh no, ghosts. Even though I live, you know, right next to a cemetery, my first thought was, okay, well, you know, he's crazy. But then after installing a new bathroom fan, I realized, oh, there's mice in our attic, and he was staring up at the ceiling where the mice were. So now we deconstructed that narrative, and we know that my cat is not crazy. If anything, he's a genius.
Yeah, he is.
And in some ways, you know, he's not perfect. But we deconstructed that narrative, and now we know there's mice. So there's wisdom in being skeptical about things to understand stuff, but there's being skeptical to a fault, you know. And there's coming to a point where we understand and we can appreciate there's something that's beyond basic practical explanations. So that would be our job, is to understand, okay, let's break this apart and see what we can understand before proceeding to what we cannot.
Well, on the other hand, we don't want to, all that being said, we don't want to minimize what Betty has reported.
No, that's not the goal.
There could very easily be an intersect point where someone is very aware of you being in the house. We find that in many of these parallel worlds, the laws of physics are different. There can be awareness. There can be contact. But we don't believe these are dead people. We believe that these are people or versions of people, because everything is possible in the multiverse, but I don't see how death could be possible, even for the body, because there's so many versions of ourselves, if this narrative is correct, which we found it to be. So it's very possible that there may be someone interacting, as Ben said, who doesn't like dogs, would be seeing the dogs as something of an annoyance. As a matter of fact, we have often run into cases where the quote-unquote ghost thinks we're ghosts haunting them. Because how do they see us? They see us across the membranes, but as Ben said, these electrically charged membranes, physicists actually call them that, between these parallel worlds. And you look like you're glowing or spooky or foggy or something like that. And we have found that there have been times when you have to talk, communicate with them, tell them you're not a ghost, because they're going about their day and they see you like a fog moving around the house. I mean, that's I've literally run into that time and again. So there are all these possibilities that we would look at, and we will set up a time with you to come down to Coventry to check it out. So please don't be alarmed. Let us know as we go before we get down. Keep us in the loop, and we'll be talking to you. So thank you, Betty, for writing in.
Indeed.
Okay. So we have several questions we did not get to in previous shows here that I think we should move on before we... all right, we kind of addressed... well, let's take this one. Keith from Saluda, South Carolina.
Okie dokie. And Keith writes to us, I'm always interested in your show, but especially the ones about ancient aliens, to coin a phrase. But the shows are not long enough. Don't we know it? Yeah. It seems totally obvious that our ancestors were contacted and influenced by extraterrestrials, ultraterrestrials, interdimensionals, or all of the above. Their ancient documents and their folklore do not allow for any other explanation, in my opinion. The first chapter of your book, Behind the Paranormal, really spells this out, the paranormal in human history. I know you are men of faith. Can you talk more about where you draw the line between these early visitors, the divine impressions they left, and the actual God?
Well, this guy really does listen to the show, and he's read our book, so we can address that from a point of view of some knowledge, I hope. This has come up a lot lately, especially people find out that I have a seminary background and that we are people of faith, that you've got all kinds of interesting things going on in ancient history. We did a show with our good friend Reverend Michael Carter about UFOs in the Bible and all these things that today you read, whether it be in ancient documents in general, that obviously to us seem to be craft in the sky or some sort of extraterrestrial life or alien life forms of some kind influencing our remote ancestors. And we get that. When we have talked with contactees, and whether you take they believe their stories, but whether they're objectively true, whatever that means, is the case, then there does seem to be behind all of it a divine presence. It may not be what I learned about in the seminary. It may not be what you hear about in church, synagogue, or mosque, but it does seem to be there. And I have seen it most clearly expressed in the most ancient cultures. The Andaman and Nicobar Islanders of the Indian Ocean, the Cree people of Quebec, and certainly the Australian Aboriginal people, with whom I spent a little time in 1979. And they're among all the ancient and indigenous cultures, there seems to be a very clear memory of someone coming to teach them or help them, but that behind that there is a very elegant, quiet presence of God, and even there's even a Trinitarian knowledge of it from the most ancient religions, which apparently, according to folklore studies by some, did not start out as worshiping many gods. They started out as worshiping one god who had a female counterpart and a child, very often us, the human race. And but there was always a presence. I always think of it as as like from Ezekiel, or actually it's First Kings, I think. the still small voice. God was not in the thunder, not in this, that, and the other, but it was in the still small voice. Simple, strong, beautiful, and I think that, regardless of what you think of ancient aliens or people, I think that influenced and provided some of the baggage that some religions have today. But I think that the basic truth is, yes, that's where I would draw the line, is that there, for everybody, including the extraterrestrials, if that's what they are, there seems to be behind it all a magnificent and beautiful and silent presence of the Creator or the Source or God or whatever word, puny word you want to use to describe it. So I don't know, any thoughts on that, Ben?
I have thoughts. I have a couple thoughts. And I first would like to say, I think the first thing to really point out is we as modern people like to think we're the pinnacle of human understanding. We know it all. We have science to back us up. But I don't think that's true. I think we know a lot less now than we did, 100 years ago, or even 200, 300. We know a lot less than we do 50 years ago, right? And I think it's important to point out that we like to apply our standards and understanding to other time periods when it's not viable. It doesn't make any sense. It's like, you try to look back in time and you say, well, they did this because of this reason, and it's like, well, we don't know that. And, even morals were different back in the day, It's like being a good person was, going out and destroying the closest town and taking all their stuff, It's like, what's his name? Hammurabi, right? Hammurabi was considered, an amazing leader, not because he was a good guy, but because he exercised his control over large groups of people, It's like you look at Greek heroes, right? Hercules murdered all of his children. But yet, the idea of a hero was not the idea of a hero today, And it's like, and I think that's a very important thing to point out. So I always kind of, whenever ancient aliens things come up, I always am skeptical of that, because it's like, we don't know that. We know that something happened. There was definitely some sort of outside influence in human history. You can't deny that. But to just assume that space aliens came down and built pyramids, I think is a tremendous disservice to our ancestors.
I think so, too.
Also, so I'm going to point out something else, which is very important. In 1974, philosopher Thomas Nagel wrote a very important essay for the Philosophical Review, which I think, honestly, is probably one of the most important things that has come out for phenomenology, the study of human experience, in the last 100 years, which is an essay called "What Is It Like to Be a Bat?" And I've talked about this before on the show, and it sounds goofy, but the whole premise is, can we know what it's like to be a bat? And it presents this problem of human consciousness, as we don't know, the problem of human consciousness is we can't know what it's like to be a bat. We only know what it's like to be a human consciousness inside a bat body. So we can't know how a bat thinks. We can't know what it feels like to be a bat flying around. We would just say, well, I guess I'm a bat now. I'm going to go do bat things. And we don't know what it's like to be a bat, much like, we don't know what it's like to be a god. We don't know what it's like to be an alien. We don't know what it's like to be, an angel, a ghost. We don't know, because we'd be just putting human consciousness inside of, a non-human entity. Right? I barely know what it's like to be me or you, right? So I think it's unfair to say, well, I know better than these dum-dums in, 100 BC because, I'm a smart guy. And I think it's important to understand that human consciousness has its limits in that regard. There's also this assumption that we were slaves to these beings, but that's not the case. If you ever look back at ancient documents, we tried to control them. That's what the whole point of idols was. The whole point was to capture these things and make them do what we wanted. It's like idols, if you ever read, scripture, idols weren't bad because, you're not worshiping Yahweh. Idols were bad because you were trying to control the world around you. That was the whole thing. So it's like you wonder why there are all these statues and stuff and why people gave and sacrificed things to them. It's so they could get something out of it. It's not that they were they were like, okay, there are these cosmic beings that, they're real powerful. What if I tried to control it? What's different than that? There's no difference. What if I could control the internet? What if I could control a specific area of commerce? What if I could control a god? There's no difference in human motivation. We've tried to do that forever. What if I could control sunlight? What if I could control water and use it to power things? No difference. The human condition hasn't changed at all. The only thing that's changed is gadgets, and even then, those aren't even too different. Because essentially we're still trying to do the same thing. So these cosmic entities that take an interest in us, maybe, if that's what happened, and there's evidence that there is, whether it's extraterrestrials, interdimensionals, we don't know. But whatever they are, we weren't slaves to them. They gave us stuff because we gave them stuff. And we were like, okay, cool, let's see if we can control them. And we tried. And we failed, but we tried. And so the all of this to say is, there's a narrative and a pattern that's been consistent throughout history. No matter what culture, no matter what the terms, we like to think if we know the terms and we can apply those to things, then I got it figured out. But we don't. And I think it doesn't really change how I view my relationship with the deity. If anything, it's like, okay, yeah, I'm pretty sure that a lot of stuff that's mentioned in a lot of different folklores, yeah, that stuff happened. And I don't think I can ever know the answer to any of it, whatever it is, whatever influenced us. I don't think I'll ever know the answer to it, but what I know is that something happened. And I think that our explanations for it just don't do it justice.
What you just said reminds me of something that your brother's godfather, Joseph Latender, who has been on the show before, and we were in seminary together back in 100 years ago, not the same seminary, but he said when Star Wars first came out, that the Force was the perfect God for modern people, because they could control it, manipulate it, didn't have to submit to it as such. So that kind of follows right on what you said. But on that cheerful divine note, let's go to our announcements.
Indeed. So the exterior, the exterior
UFO Festival.
It's partially exterior, but the Exeter UFO Festival returns in September at the historic Exeter, New Hampshire Town Hall over the Labor Day weekend. That's September 3rd and 4th. This is a great event, and the whole downtown gets involved. It's sponsored by the Exeter Area Kiwanis Club to benefit local children's charities, along with ourselves. Speakers will include Kathleen Martin, Peter Robbins, Jennifer Stein, Bob Terrio, Mike Stevens, Lynn Nickerson, Valerie LaFaso, Mac Maloney, special guest speakers as well, the special guest speaker, Professor and UFO experiencer Ralph Blumenthal, along with many others. And the subject of our talk, time storms, with thanks to the great British researcher Jenny Randalls, who coined the term. We plan to do our traditional live broadcast from the event on Sunday with a panel of speakers. And this is a fun event. So join us if you can. You can visit ExeterUFOFestival.org for more details.
And visit our show website, BehindTheParanormal.com, where you can find over 1,100 hours of our regular shows and special broadcasts since 2008 from CBS Radio, Achieve Radio, and here on WON AM and FM, including ones that have been restored in the archives there. Also hear many of these broadcasts on the major podcast platforms, including iTunes, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Download our show app. Doesn't do a lot, but it's free, and you'll be able to have direct links to those broadcasts from, I think it's Spreaker, actually. So
lovely. And so you can visit our website. It has charity pages on it as well, with several good causes that we have adopted over the years, including Hope for Hilldale Cemetery in Haverhill, Massachusetts, USA Cares, Canadian Veterans Advocacy, Helping Haiti's Orphans, and the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation of America, the Sisterhood of Ground Zero, and most recently the Western Kentucky Tornado Relief Fund.
We'll have to put in the flood most recent Kentucky flood charity in there, too.
Oh, yeah, geez.
So what's in the pantry for next week, Ben?
Well, next week, that's August 14th, we'll welcome back Valerie LaFaso to talk about the empathic medium experience and a preview of the Exeter UFO Festival. Not necessarily unrelated topics. You can send your questions and comments to paul@behindtheparanormal.com.
And we leave you today with a thought from the late, great Stanton T. Friedman from his foreword to our 2016 book, Behind the Paranormal, Everything You Know Is Wrong. Quote, "We need to recognize that we don't know everything. So rather than saying that's impossible, or if that new idea were true, I'm so smart I'd already know about it, we should be checking it out." Unquote. I'm Paul Eno.
And I'm Ben Eno, and thanks for joining us on our great cosmic journey, and we shall see you next time on Behind the Paranormal.
Return to this radio frequency 167 hours from now for another edition of Behind the Paranormal with Paul and Ben Eno.